Hey guys, I'm John Campea, and thanks for visiting my YouTube channel. Now, you may not know that this week marks the 5-month anniversary since the release of the final movie in the Skywalker saga, Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. Now, there are those who like the movie and those that don't, and that's fine. I have found, though, that generally speaking, those that like the movie tend to like all the other Disney-era Star Wars films, and those that didn't like the movie tend to not like any of the other Disney-era Star Wars films. I am somebody who really enjoys all the other Disney-era Star Wars films, some more than others. Like I love The Force Awakens, for example, but I really didn't like The Rise of Skywalker at all. And as we hit the 5-month anniversary of its release, I realized I've never really sat down to really kind of flesh out for myself what was it about this film that made it not work for me when the other ones have. And so maybe as an act of self-therapy, I decided to sit down and do that. So for now, here are my thoughts about why The Rise of Skywalker failed for me. Now listen, if you like the film, I'm not trying to take that away from you. If you enjoyed it, that's awesome. But this was really more self-reflective for me. So here's why The Rise of Skywalker, coming from somebody who loves all the other ones, didn't work for me. The main culprits of how The Rise of Skywalker failed, at least to me, can be broken down into a number of admittedly nitpicky sort of issues, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and 5 main problematic themes that attack the core of the film, leaving it feeling empty. Those 5 main problematic themes are: number 1, the Emperor; number 2, the over-reliance on coincidence and luck; number 3, the redemption of Kylo Ren; number 4, time; and number 5, Rey's lineage. Each of these 5 main problematic themes painfully point to what I would say is the main overarching problem with the film, which is the obvious and jarring lack of an overall plan for the new trilogy from the beginning on the part of Kathleen Kennedy and her team at Lucasfilm, which lead a promising start of the new films to its falling apart at the end. Issue number 1, the Emperor. The first thing you have to know about Palpatine is that he is a major player in the story of Star Wars. It could be argued that the first 6 episodes of Star Wars are about the rise, dominance, and ultimate fall of the Emperor when Vader threw him down the Death Star shaft in Return of the Jedi. The death of the Emperor is the ultimate culmination of the first 6 episodes and of the series as a whole when the original trilogy first came out. With that in mind, the return of Palpatine after such a definitive end in Return of the Jedi, and with absolutely no hint or suggestion of his return in Force Awakens or The Last Jedi, should have been something that was discovered by the audience in the flow of the story. Instead, we, the audience, are simply told that the Emperor returned at some point in the recent past. The opening crawl of The Rise of Skywalker informs the audience, by the way, the Emperor came back recently by announcing his return in a broadcast to the galaxy. The dead speak, proclaims the opening crawl. We were robbed of the reveal of Palpatine's return. The revelation of Palpatine's return should have been a dramatic turning point in the story, and instead, it's relegated to an infographic at the start of the movie. So before the opening crawl is even finished, you're left feeling like the movie is already kind of leaving you behind. This sudden and jarring reintroduction of the Emperor is the first sign of a story that was not well planned out. Because the return of Palpatine was never a part of the plan or something that J.J. Abrams even remotely had in mind when he first did The Force Awakens. And so we go through that film and The Last Jedi without the remotest mention of him or his possible return. The last-minute decision to incorporate the Emperor into Rise of Skywalker left them without the time or narrative foundation to bring him back properly, and thus, the confounding decision to just pronounce his return in the opening crawl had to suffice. Now, moving beyond the reintroduction of Palpatine, we come to his relationship with Snoke. Since Palpatine was never in the plans for the new Star Wars trilogy, Snoke being a creation of Palpatine was also clearly not in the cards at the beginning. Much like the Emperor himself was never explained or gave his backstory or origins in the original Star Wars films, Snoke was originally going to be treated the same way. His death in The Last Jedi was going to leave the character and his origins a mystery that ultimately wasn't essential to the story. However, with the return of Palpatine came a need to explain what role Snoke really played if Palpatine had indeed been pulling the strings the whole time, which was never a part of the plan in the first place. Because you see, if Palpatine was the mastermind, there is a great need to know who and what Snoke's role was in the first place. But as we'll see, Palpatine's answer for the Snoke issue only complicates and confuses the situation even more. "I made Snoke," pronounces Palpatine to Kylo Ren. However, Palpatine claiming creation of Snoke only creates more problems for the narrative than just leaving Snoke as a mystery. For example, if Palpatine created Snoke, who was so incredibly powerful in the Force, why didn't Palpatine just have Snoke take over the Sith throne? Sith don't pass on leadership by family lineage in Star Wars lore, so why not Snoke? Or for that matter, why didn't Palpatine just create an army of Snokes? In the scene, we clearly see he has lots of spare Snoke parts just laying around. Imagine an army of powerful Dark Force-wielding Snokes running across the galaxy. I mean, Palpatine had the time and resources to build thousands of new Star Destroyers with Death Star cannons on them. Why not more Snokes? And by the way, while we're talking about Palpatine and the opening scene on Exegol, did anybody else notice that Kylo Ren brings an entire Star Destroyer and a legion of stormtroopers to kill those jobbers on the first planet protecting and guarding the Sith Wayfinder? But when he goes to the Sith world of Exegol, where the powerful Emperor himself awaits, he just goes alone. Yeah, that didn't make any sense to me at all. So Kylo gets there and encounters Palpatine, who promises to make him a new Emperor in the galaxy. But the thing is, the First Order had already sort of taken over most of the galaxy and practically eliminated the Resistance. So what exactly was the Emperor offering Ren that he didn't already have? Anyway, that's just one of those little nitpicks I was referring to earlier. Not a big deal. The point is, at this point in the movie, we're only about 10 minutes into it, and it was already frustratingly clear that J.J. Abrams and crew were essentially winging it, making it up as they went along, because all this stuff was clearly never planned out or given any forethought when the new films were getting started. And as a result, these new concepts felt random, conflicting with what came before, and basically not making much sense. Issue number 2. The over-reliance on coincidence and luck. When a story is well thought out and planned properly, coincidence and luck aren't needed because you've mapped out how your story moves from point A to point B using narrative progression. Oh sure, from time to time, a stroke of good luck can work in a story. For example, the droid R5 blowing up due to a bad motivator, allowing R2 to remain with Luke and 3PO in Star Wars. Or a random rat running around in Ant-Man's van, releasing Ant-Man from the quantum realm in Endgame. Even heroes need a break now and again, so a well-placed stroke of good fortune can work. However, a story needing to rely on random hits of luck repeatedly throughout the movie is once again a sign that they never really thought out how the film would get from A to B. In The Rise of Skywalker, Rey and crew head to the world of Pasaana to look for the missing Sith Wayfinder by tracking a cold trail that was being followed by Luke in search of the Jedi hunter Ochi. But the entire sequence of events on Pasaana are a series of one inexplicable and unbelievable coincidence and stroke of good luck after the other. First of all, they just so happen to arrive on Pasaana during a special festival that occurs once only every 42 years. I mean, what are the odds of that? This festival gave them cover and a crowd to hide in. Secondly, the search for Ochi's ship ends with them having no problem at all finding it since it's been conveniently parked for a decade or more on top of a big rock that can be easily seen for miles around, with the doors unlocked, fully fueled, and still completely space-worthy and ready to fly. Oh, and being easy to find, unlocked, fully fueled, and ready to fly, you could add to their stroke of good luck by the fact that no one ever took it, and instead just left it there conveniently for them to find. Thirdly, in the speeder chase with the stormtroopers that fly, our heroes' insane good luck continues as their speeder gets destroyed, throwing them into the very quicksand that will ultimately sink them to the very tunnels beneath the surface that Luke himself was never able to find and that they themselves would never have found were it not for the power of coincidence and luck. Fourth, while walking around in the dark in those tunnels, they just happened to stumble across the dagger. A dagger they didn't even know they were looking for or needed, that was buried in the dirt. Turns out, that dagger would show them the exact place in the destroyed Death Star that the remaining Wayfinder can be found, but we'll talk about that one in a minute. Fifth, after Chewie is captured, there's a 50-50 chance that the shuttle Rey and Kylo are fighting over, and that Rey ultimately destroys, is the one that has Chewie on it. But, you guessed it, luckily, it was the wrong one and Chewie lived. Oh, and remember that dagger we were just talking about? Yeah, turns out the dagger is a navigational tool that will point to where the Wayfinder is on the fallen Death Star. But, in order for it to work, you have to physically be standing in the exact right spot. Out of all the places on Endor that the Falcon could have crash landed, they landed in the exact spot out of tens of thousands of possible square miles where Rey held up the dagger and it lined up perfectly. What are the chances? Oh, and by the way, after luckily finding out where on the Death Star the Wayfinder was, Rey, who grew up on a desert planet and never once saw a body of water in her life until her short visit on Luke's Paradise Island, suddenly knew how to expertly pilot a sail barge across impossibly rough waters. A nitpick, yes, but it sort of drove me crazy. Anyway, there are more examples, but the constant flow of coincidence and luck leaves an audience member feeling like the heroes don't actually have to accomplish anything, solve any problem, or escape any trap, because inevitably, the filmmakers will just throw out a random coincidence that solves the problems for them. Again, it points to a lack of thought-out plans, both on a large scale for the series and on a limited scale for the individual film. Issue number 3, the redemption of Kylo Ren. Redemption has, to a degree, been a theme that Star Wars has used before when it comes specifically to the character of Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader. Murder a bunch of children and commit genocide throughout the galaxy? No problem. Save your own kid once and get into Jedi heaven. Anyway. Because of this, a lot of people have speculated that Kylo Ren was also on his grandfather's path to redemption. The problem is, unlike Vader, who started to show emotional vulnerability to Luke as early as The Empire Strikes Back, and then clearly showed an emotional inner struggle with his conversations with Luke before the Emperor confrontation in Return of the Jedi, i.e., "It's too late for me, my son," Kylo never had a path of redemption. In The Force Awakens, Kylo Ren faced a moment of crisis standing with his father on the railless walkway to choose the light and go with his father, or choose the dark and kill his father. He chose the dark and murdered Han Solo. Vader faced a similar moment of crisis. In Return of the Jedi, as he watched Palpatine killing his son, Vader had to choose to save his son or let him die. He chose the light. Kylo Ren was given another crisis moment in The Last Jedi. Finding the Resistance stronghold on Crate, Kylo had a chance to make a decision while standing on the bridge of the First Order walker, and he chose to give the order to destroy the stronghold and kill everybody inside, knowing that his mother was inside. As we arrive in The Rise of Skywalker, the film starts with Kylo Ren slaughtering a planet's inhabitants who were safeguarding the Sith Wayfinder. Shortly after that, we see him tossing the severed head of the Resistance officer who supplied Poe and Finn with the secret message from the First Order spy. He pursues his power play with and against Palpatine, all the while relentlessly trying to turn Rey to the dark side. You see, unlike Vader, Kylo never once started down a redemption path. It just happened. Because out of nowhere, as he's about to kill a fallen Rey, he hears his mother just say a single word, "Ben." An entire face-to-face conversation with Han Solo ended in murder, but a single word, "Ben," completely changed the disposition and fate of Kylo Ren. Some people have described this out-of-nowhere redemption as unearned, but I think a more accurate description is unplanned. The resulting radical change of direction with Kylo Ren leaves one feeling like what we had experienced before with Ren had been dishonest and ultimately pointless if they were just going to throw away everything they had done with the character in order to give him an unplanned redemption. Issue number 4, time. The passage and use of time in a story can be problematic even in great films, but in The Rise of Skywalker, they took it to a whole new level. The film is positioned to take place in its entirety in 16 hours total. An entire movie taking place over the course of 16 hours is in and of itself not necessarily a major obstacle, but in this movie, it moves beyond the profoundly unlikely and into the utterly absurd. Think about it. Hyperspace travel in Star Wars is not instantaneous like teleporting in Star Trek. It can take hours, days, and even weeks to travel from one system to another, depending how far out that system is. Understanding that, the preposterous way the movie deals with time becomes apparent. In just 16 hours, our heroes travel to the planet of Pisana. Then, after the chase and discoveries made there, they whisk away to the distant world of Kijimi, land, search the town, and ultimately find Babu Frik, who performs an expert-level and complex procedure on C-3PO. They then return to their ship to fly up to a city-sized Star Destroyer to find and rescue Chewie, then escape and fly off to another distant world, Endor. Sail out to the moon-sized Death Star wreckage and quickly climb her way through the wreckage to the Emperor's old throne room to find the Wayfinder. The heroes then separate, with Rey traveling all the way out to the hidden world of Act 2, where she speaks with Ghost Luke, and the rest travel back to the Rebel base. From that point, Rey makes the long journey to the Sith world of Exegol, while the rest of the heroes also make plans to fly into Exegol to engage the enemy, all within 16 hours. And as if that wasn't ridiculous enough when it comes to time, let's talk about Lando's mission to fly all the way back to the core worlds, recruit and enlist thousands of people with space combat-ready ships, then, after recruiting them all, fly all the way out to Exegol with the new makeshift fleet, all in 10 minutes. No, seriously, the movie says Lando did all of that in 10 minutes. 10 bloody minutes. So obviously, not a lot of thought, preparation, planning, or time went into the story when the passage of time and use of time is so brutally mismanaged. Issue number 5. Rey's Palpatine Lineage. No other issue on this list embodies the narrative chaos caused by a lack of vision and planning than the lineage issue of Rey. The genesis of the issue goes all the way back to The Force Awakens. J.J. Abrams' original plan for Rey was that her parents were indeed nobody. He explained in an interview that he saw it as important that Rey was no one or from any particular lineage. He went on to say the following: "I really feel like the assumption that any character needs to have inherited a certain number of midichlorians or needs to be part of a bloodline, it's not that I don't believe that as part of canon. I'm just saying that at 11 years old, that wasn't where my heart was. And so, I respect canon, but I also say that the Force has always seemed to me to be more inclusive and stronger than that." Now later, when asked about The Last Jedi's proclamation that Rey's parents were no one, actress Daisy Ridley confirmed that this is what J.J. Abrams expressed to her when they shot The Force Awakens. So if J.J.'s original plan was that Rey was no one, and that to him it was actually important that she didn't come from any sort of Force heritage, and Rian Johnson followed through on that original vision, why did The Rise of Skywalker suddenly change course and make her a Palpatine? Palpatine, who wasn't ever supposed to be in the new films in the first place. The whys, I suppose, really aren't important, but the results are. And the result was a jarring change of gears and direction that left the original 2 films meaningless and inconsequential as far as Rey was concerned. Look, say what you will about George Lucas's prequel films, I am personally not a fan of them. But one thing that those films did much more effectively was come across as one consistent and planned out story. George Lucas had a vision and a plan for the 3 prequels, and so each film felt like it had a natural flow and connection from the previous movie. This ultimately makes for a much better viewing experience than 3 seemingly random and jarring stories that were clearly made up as they went along, even if a couple of those individual films were fine to great in their own right. Because like in sports, winging it can work for a time, but at some point the lack of a plan catches up to you. For the new Star Wars trilogy, that point came in The Rise of Skywalker, and the price was high. In conclusion, there are loads of other smaller nitpick things we could talk about, like Leia and Luke of all people, who would appreciate more than anybody else in the galaxy being told the truth about their heritage, Skywalkers, lying to Rey and keeping her heritage from her. Or Leia telling Rey, never be afraid of who you are. And yet the very first thing Rey does at the end of the film is change her name to Skywalker, essentially running away from who she was. Or that the well-intentioned inclusion of Carrie Fisher in the movie by using old, unused footage from another film never really worked and ended up making her scenes feel awkward, unnatural, and kinda just off. Or the highly anticipated Knights of Ren finally arrive and do nothing but follow people around. They follow and walk behind Kylo Ren, they follow our heroes in the meteor belt, they then follow our heroes on the ground in Kijimi, and finally, they just get slaughtered by Ben Solo. Thanks for coming, guys. Or what about those thousands of new Star Destroyers, all with Death Star guns on them? A planet-destroying weapon needed a structure the size of a Death Star. If Palpatine's followers had been working on the new fleet for 30 years, then that means that the technology to build mini Death Star weapons had already been around before the Emperor died. So why did he have to go and make a second Death Star in the first place and not just these Star Destroyers? Now, yes, these ones are all admittedly smaller nitpicks, but they begin to add up and become amplified even more when held up to the other major problems we just discussed here. And there you have it, guys. The results of 5 months of reflection about why I didn't like Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. Now listen, if there's any of you who did like the film, I'm not trying to take that away from you at all. And I'm not trying to convince you to not like it. If you liked it, that's great. But for me as a Star Wars fan, in particular, a fan of the Disney era Star Wars films, I just really wanted to sit down and go through why this one in particular, the final one, the one I was really excited about, didn't quite work for me. Anyway, guys, those are my thoughts. What are your thoughts on the whole thing? Jump down to the comment section below and let me know your thoughts. Thanks a lot for being here, guys. My name's John Campea, and until my next video, bye-bye.